My name is Evelyn Carter, though the few people who still remember me from the old days call me Evie. I'm 72 years old, and I've lived in California my entire life. Not the California in postcards, not palm trees in Santa Monica or the glitter of Los Angeles, but the quieter, dustier heart of the state, the Central Valley. Fresno, a place where the summers bake everything into silence and the winters settle like a faint gray memory over rooftops and orchards. I've lived in the same beige-and-blue house for 46 years, bought it with my late husband Arthur, back when interest rates made your palms sweat, and we ate canned soup 3 nights a week just to meet the mortgage. It wasn't much even then, 2 bedrooms, a small yard, creaking floors, but it became our world. The place where we built every holiday, every tradition, every fight, every forgiveness, every quiet morning coffee. The place where our children took their first steps. The place where Arthur took his last breath. The neighborhood has changed more than I have. Houses that once held families now hold renters who don't wave back. The lemon tree in my yard still produces more fruit than I can give away, but the neighbors who used to line up for baskets of them moved years ago. Even the sky feels different somehow, hazier, more distant, as if trying to forget the years it watched me grow older. For 38 years, I worked at the Fresno Public Library. I shelved books, helped 4th graders find their first chapter novels, guided lost teenagers through college applications, and hid in the supply closet to cry the day Arthur was diagnosed. The library wasn't glamorous, and it certainly didn't make me rich, but it made me useful. It made me feel like I mattered, like the world still needed something from me. When I retired, the days grew quieter in ways I wasn't prepared for. The kettle whistles louder when it's the only sound in a kitchen. The walls seem to breathe slower. Time stretches like taffy, long and sticky in the middle, especially when the phone doesn't ring unless it's a reminder to refill a prescription. I have 3 children. Or rather, I gave birth to 3 adults who now orbit my life the way distant planets orbit a fading star, loosely, infrequently, and without warmth. There is Michael, the eldest, successful, impatient, always talking as if every conversation is something he needs to rush through. There is Denise, who lives in San Diego and texts more than she calls. And then there is Ryan, the youngest, the one who used to hug me tightest when he was little, but now seems to reserve that tenderness for people who can give him something in return. They visit on holidays, if visit is even the right word. They come, they scroll on their phones, they offer quick hugs, and they leave with leftover food packed neatly into containers that never return. They love me, I think, but they love me from a distance.
And distance is a cold thing when you're old. Still, Christmas has always been the one day that can pull us all back into the same room. Not because my children crave tradition, but because Christmas is the one thing I refuse to let slip away. It's the only fragile thread that still ties us together. For weeks before the holiday, I prepare as if the house itself has been waiting all year to come alive again. I iron the same red tablecloth Arthur and I bought at a discount store in 1979. I take down the box of ornaments we collected over 4 decades, the clay snowman Ryan made in kindergarten, the glass angel Arthur bought the year Michael moved out, the beaded wreath Denise crafted when she still believed glitter could fix everything. I bake ginger cookies, even though I shouldn't eat sugar anymore. I set the table early, fussing with forks and napkins as though a magazine photographer might appear at the door. I do all of this because I want Christmas to feel like home again, not just for them, but for me. I want to be seen, to be valued, to be someone whose presence means more than the wrapping paper on their gifts. But the truth I never say aloud is this. Christmas is the day I grieve the hardest, because it reminds me of everything that used to be beautiful and everything that no longer is. In the weeks leading up to this last Christmas, the Christmas that changed everything, I felt a heaviness I couldn't name. Something inside me had started to sink, like a slow leak in a boat. I kept brushing it off, telling myself I was just tired, that the cold weather was getting into my bones. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was lonely in a way that gnawed at places of me I thought were long numb. The world sees older women as background characters, quiet, harmless, easy to overlook, easy to talk over, easy to use, easy to dismiss. But inside us, storms still swirl. We still feel everything, the love, the fear, the longing, the anger. Especially the anger. And though I didn't know it then, I was standing on the edge of a moment that would change the entire shape of my life, a moment that would show me exactly how my children saw me and exactly what I needed to do to reclaim myself. I was preparing Christmas dinner the way I always did, ham in the oven, mashed potatoes in the making, the soft hum of the radio filling the quiet, when a single thought crossed my mind so gently I almost missed it. I hope this year they see me. I didn't know yet that they wouldn't. I didn't know yet that they would do worse than overlook me. I didn't know yet that they would insult me in the one moment I needed their tenderness most. But life has a way of revealing truth on the days you least expected. And that Christmas, truth arrived dressed in tinsel and holiday cheer, sharp enough to cut.
Christmas Eve arrived with a sky the color of pewter, heavy, low, the kind of winter Californian towns get only when the fog settles thick enough to make the world seem hushed. I had been up since 6, old habits. I moved through the kitchen with the kind of precision that only years of repetition give a person. A pinch more cinnamon in the sweet potatoes, extra glaze on the ham, the green beans sautéed lightly so they kept their crisp. Arthur used to joke that my Christmas dinners tasted like forgiveness, warm, comforting, and meant to make everything else easier. I hoped, foolishly perhaps, that it would make things easier this year too. By 4 o'clock, the table was set, candles unlit, plates waiting, chairs neatly aligned. I stepped back to admire it. It looked beautiful in a quiet, earnest way, like a memory trying very hard to stay alive. The doorbell rang. My heart jumped, the way it always did. Michael arrived first. He walked in with confidence, the kind of stride a man develops after decades of being told he's important. He kissed my cheek without really looking at me, as if checking off a box, then immediately scanned the room for outlets to charge his phone. "Wi-Fi still the same password?" he asked, already typing. "Yes, dear," I answered, but he had already stopped listening. 10 minutes later, Denise rushed in, perfume cloud entering the house before she did. She hugged me politely, the kind of hug you give a neighbor, not a mother. She placed a gift bag on the counter without removing her coat. "Is this the same centerpiece from last year?" she asked, glancing at the table. I smiled. "Yes, it's my favorite." She didn't answer. She was already scrolling through her phone. Ryan came last. My baby, or rather, the man who used to be my baby. He entered with a forced smile, a woman I didn't know trailing behind him. Another girlfriend, I assumed, though he didn't introduce her. He walked straight to the kitchen. "Smells a little burnt," he said, lifting the lid off a pan. "It's not burnt," I replied softly. "It's just the spices." He shrugged, indifferent. They all gathered in the living room, talking among themselves, immersed in their screens. I moved quietly around them, offering appetizers, trying to ask questions, trying to connect. But every answer was short, distracted, dismissive. At one point, I sat on the edge of the couch and simply watched them. 3 grown adults, my children, my entire life's work, sitting under my roof like visitors who were eager to leave. I tried to remind myself that they had busy lives, responsibilities, pressures. Still, the silence between us felt heavier than the fog outside. When dinner was finally ready, I lit the candles and called them to the table. They came slowly, reluctantly, as though doing me a favor. I took my seat at the head of the table and offered a small prayer, thanking God for another Christmas together.
When I lifted my head, no one else had bowed theirs. They passed dishes without saying thank you. They ate without commenting on the meal. They talked to each other as though I weren't sitting inches away. Every clink of silverware seemed to underline the distance between us. Then it happened, the moment that split my life in two. It started as a low conversation between Michael and Denise near the kitchen doorway. They didn't lower their voices enough. Maybe they assumed I couldn't hear. Maybe they didn't care. "She's getting worse," Denise said. "Yeah," Michael answered. "She shouldn't be handling bills anymore." "I saw her checkbook on the counter," Denise continued. "Everything looked messy." "Messy?" Michael scoffed. "She's been slipping for years." Ryan joined in, chuckling softly. "Honestly, she's useless at anything financial now. Did you see how confused she got about the online order I made on her card?" "I told you guys," Michael added. "We need to take over her accounts. It's irresponsible to let her keep control." Denise sighed with irritation, not concern. She can't manage anything important anymore. And then the words that sliced through me like glass. She's basically worthless now, especially with money. Worthless. In my own home, on Christmas, from the mouths of the children I raised. I froze in place, the serving spoon still in my hand. The room tilted slightly, not physically, but emotionally, the way a soul tilts when it's hit hard enough to bruise. I stared at the candles flickering in the center of the table, listening to them speak of me like I was furniture. Like I wasn't the woman who worked 2 jobs when Michael needed braces, the woman who stayed up all night sewing Denise's prom dress, the woman who drove Ryan to baseball practice for 7 years without missing a single game. Worthless. The word rolled around the room like an echo that refused to die. They returned to the table laughing lightly, unaware or uncaring that I had heard everything. I smiled a small, strained smile, folded my napkin, served another portion of potatoes to a plate that didn't need more. My heart was beating hard enough to feel like it was shaking inside my chest, but my voice was steady when I finally spoke. "Does anyone want dessert?" They all shook their heads at once. Too much sugar. Trying to cut carbs. I'll pass. I nodded, stood up, gathered plates with hands steady enough to surprise even me. The house felt colder suddenly, even though the oven was still warm. After dinner, they left quickly. Hugs rushed. Excuses vague. "We'll see you soon, Mom. Call me if you need something. We'll talk about everything later." Everything. Meaning my accounts. My autonomy. My worth. The door closed. Silence swelled back into the house. I walked to the dining table and sat down in the chair I had chosen for Arthur decades ago. The candle flames flickered softly, reflecting in the half-empty glasses. The ham cooled. The potatoes stiffened. The room felt abandoned, not because it was empty, but because I realized for the first time in my life that my children had stopped seeing me as a mother long before I stopped seeing them as my children. I whispered the word under my breath. Worthless. I tasted it, felt it, let it hang in the air. Then, slowly, something deep inside me shifted. Not brokenness, not sorrow, something older, fiercer, a dignity I had forgotten I owned. The insult didn't destroy me, it awakened me. And before the candles died, I made a silent promise to myself, a promise that would change everything in the weeks to come. They will never use my name, my trust, or my accounts against me again. The morning after Christmas always felt a little hollow, but that year it felt different, heavy. I woke up before the sun, the house still dark, except for the faint blue glow leaking through the curtains. My joints ached the way they always did on cold mornings, but the ache inside my chest was new, sharp, insistent, too alive to ignore. I put on my robe and walked into the kitchen. The remnants of last night were still there, the serving dishes stacked on the counter, the crumpled napkins, the faint smell of cinnamon and roasted ham. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, looking at it all as if it belonged to someone else's life. There are moments in a woman's life when she's forced to confront a truth she's avoided for too long. For me, it happened in the quiet of that kitchen, with winter light barely touching the walls. For 72 years, I had been many things: a wife, a mother, a librarian, a caretaker, a listener, a giver. And I had done all of it without expecting anything in return. Not even recognition, not even gratitude. But hearing my own children, the same children whose skinned knees I kissed, whose broken hearts I held, whose futures I sacrificed for, call me worthless, it did something to me, something subtle and enormous at the same time.
I made coffee slowly, each step deliberate. Scoop the grounds, pour the water, wait for the drip. As the smell filled the kitchen, I sat at the table and wrapped my hands around the mug. The warmth grounded me, and in that stillness, the memories began to surface. Memories I had buried under years of excuses and motherly forgiveness. I saw the first time Michael borrowed money and promised he'd pay it back, but never did. I remembered Denise asking to use my credit card just for this month, giving the card back only after maxing it out on weekend trips and online shopping. I saw Ryan sitting at my table years ago, explaining with a grin that since he didn't use half of the apps on my account, it only made sense for him to access it. And I remembered something else too, the way they spoke to me over time, how every year their patience thinned, how every visit grew shorter, how every request became an expectation. How their tone shifted from affectionate to condescending without me even noticing when the change happened. They had been treating me like I was fading, like I was someone who existed behind a glass window they didn't have the time to look through. And I had let them. Not because I lacked strength, not because I lacked clarity, but because mothers are trained to forgive before they even feel the hurt. I sipped my coffee and let the truth settle. They didn't see me as a person anymore, not someone with a mind, a voice, a life, a history, a worth. They saw me as an obligation, a backup plan, a wallet, a resource, a fading inconvenience who might soon become easier to manage. The realization hurt, but grief, once named, becomes strangely empowering. It sharpens the world, it clears the fog, and in that clarity, something inside me woke up, something steady and strong and long overdue. I stood and walked to my small desk in the corner of the living room. Papers were stacked neatly, bills paid on time, bank statements filed by month, a folder of passwords written carefully in my own handwriting. Not a single sign of confusion, not a single sign of decline, not a single hint that my children's accusations had any truth behind them. I placed my palm flat on the papers and whispered something I had never said aloud. I'm not the one who has forgotten. It was such a small sentence, but it felt like opening a door that had been locked for years. In the days that followed, I moved differently, quieter but not timid, slower but with direction, invisible to the world but newly visible to myself. I noticed things I hadn't allowed myself to see before. A missing check, a subscription charged to my account that I had never signed up for, emails asking to reset passwords I hadn't touched, a line item on a bill showing a device logged into my account that wasn't mine. The pieces began to align. They weren't planning to take control of my finances someday. They had already started. One afternoon, standing at the sink washing a mug, a memory returned so suddenly it nearly made me drop it. A moment from 2 months earlier when Michael had said, offhandedly, "We should streamline your bills, Mom. You're getting too old to keep track of everything." Too old. As if age erased intelligence. As if time rewrote history. As if decades of responsibility could be dismissed like an outdated receipt. That's when I first felt it. Not anger, not yet, but something colder and clearer. A line being drawn, a boundary forming, a truth settling. They thought they had the right to manage me, to override me, to minimize me. And if I didn't act soon, the world, banks, agencies, courts, might eventually believe them. I tried my hands on a towel and stood at the window, watching fog curl around the fence like a ghost settling in. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of being alone. I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't take control.
The words circled back in my mind. Worthless. They had said it so casually, so confidently, so carelessly. But that word didn't define me. It defined them. And the moment I understood that, something inside me hardened. Not bitterness, not vengeance, but a new spine of resolve. A woman who had given her life to others was finally ready to give something back to herself. That night, I opened my planner, turned to a clean page, and wrote 2 simple sentences. I am not helpless. I am not done. Then, with hands that didn't tremble at all, I wrote a third. Tomorrow, I start. It wasn't a plan yet, not a strategy, just a promise. A promise strong enough to carry me into the storm I didn't know I was about to walk through. A storm I would not only survive, but one I would end on my terms. The next morning, I woke up with an unusual clarity humming beneath my ribs,
like the stillness right before a California earthquake, the kind of silence that doesn't warn, it promises. I moved through the house slowly, deliberately, touching the back of chairs, running my hand along the counter, grounding myself in the life I had built. This home had held me through decades of storms, grief, love, widowhood, loneliness, and all the ordinary days in between. And now it was holding me again, not as a refuge, but as a witness to the woman I was becoming, not softer or harder, but sharper. I made oatmeal, added cinnamon like I always did, but ate only a few bites. My stomach wasn't unsettled. My mind was too alive to be distracted with hunger. I sat at the table with my notebook, the one where I had written, "Tomorrow I start." So I did. At 9 o'clock sharp, I dialed the number of the credit union where I'd banked for 37 years. The voice that answered was familiar, sweet, polite, the young woman who always asked about my garden. "Mrs. Drake, how was your holiday?" she asked warmly. I closed my eyes. It was eye-opening, I answered. I told her I needed appointments, in person, private, and soon. She paused, sensing something beneath the surface. "Of course, come in at 1. I'll clear time for you." I thanked her, hung up, and stared at the phone for a moment. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I dressed with intention, not to impress, not for vanity, but to remind myself that presentation is also protection. A soft blue sweater, my good black slacks, my hair brushed back and pinned neatly, earrings Thomas had given me on our 30th anniversary, small silver leaves that always made me feel quietly elegant. I looked in the mirror before leaving. I didn't see a vulnerable woman. I saw someone preparing to reclaim her life. The drive to the credit union felt surreal. The winter sun low, the road stamped from rain, the palm trees along the street bending slightly with the wind. Everything familiar, yet newly charged. Inside the office, the young woman's smile faded when she saw my expression.
"How can I help you today, Mrs. Drake?" I placed my hands on the desk. I need to place restrictions on every account, full security measures, no access granted to anyone but me, no exceptions. Her eyes widened. "Has someone—" "Yes." The word left my mouth firm and clean. She nodded and got to work. It took nearly an hour. New passwords, new PINs, two-factor authentication, removal of all authorized users, a note on my profile requiring in-person verification for any change. When she opened a screen showing login attempts from unfamiliar devices, she looked horrified. "Mrs. Drake, someone tried to access your account from 2 locations yesterday." I inhaled slowly. I know who it was. She didn't ask. She didn't need to. When I left the credit union, something inside me felt taller. Not proud, not smug, just certain. But that was only the beginning. That afternoon, I went to the phone company, the utilities, the insurance office, and my investment advisor. Each time I said the same sentence: "I want everything in my name only." The responses varied: surprise, confusion, concern, but the results didn't. By the end of the day, every account had been locked by barriers my children couldn't break without going through me. Driving home, the winter sunset draped the sky in streaks of orange and rose. It looked almost festive, as if the world itself were applauding the quiet rebellion happening inside my car. When I arrived home, the answering machine blinked red, 4 missed calls. My stomach tightened, but I didn't press play. I wasn't ready to hear excuses disguised as affection. Not yet. Instead, I made tea and sat in the living room, letting the warmth seep into my bones. The house felt different, still mine, but more mine than it had been in years. I looked around and realized something painful. I had spent so long trying not to be a burden that I had forgotten I was allowed to have boundaries. I had thought love meant enduring. I had thought patience meant silence. I had thought loyalty meant surrender. But loyalty without respect is a rope tightening around your own neck. I set my tea down and picked up the notebook again. I wrote slowly, letting each letter anchor me. I am done apologizing for existing. I am done shrinking so others can feel tall. I am done letting people who love me conditionally decide my worth. The phone rang again. I didn't answer, because the next part of the plan required silence. That evening, as the streetlights flickered on and the neighborhood cloaked itself in December dark, I did something no one expected. Not even myself. I gathered every shared account: streaming services, phone lines, cloud storage, subscriptions, insurance add-ons, all the little conveniences they had quietly attached themselves to over the years. One by one, I ended them. With a single click, the phone line Denise used on my plan disconnected. Michael's tablet lost access to my Wi-Fi account.
The streaming services logged them out with no explanation. The shared grocery delivery subscription vanished. The cloud backup they stored their photos on shut down. The travel rewards card they had quietly linked themselves to dissolved. The gym membership on my autopay, the one I'd been covering for 3 years, canceled. I clicked and ended, clicked and ended, clicked and ended. Not out of spite, not for revenge, for dignity. When the last account closed, the room fell silent. Not empty, peaceful. I looked around and felt something swell inside me, something that had been buried for years under guilt and obligation. Freedom. Not the loud kind, not the defiant kind, but the quiet freedom of a woman who finally stopped handing out access to people who had stopped valuing her. I closed the laptop, turned off the lights, and stood at the window. Outside, Christmas decorations still twinkled along the street, glowing reindeer, red ribbons, plastic snowmen. But I didn't feel bitterness towards them, because this year, Christmas had given me something unexpected, the truth, and the truth had given me something even better, myself. Tomorrow they would call. Tomorrow they would demand answers. Tomorrow the consequences of their own cruelty would begin. But tonight I rested, because a woman doesn't have to roar to take her power back. Sometimes all she has to do is end every account. The next morning I woke to the phone ringing before the sun had fully lifted itself over the California horizon. The sky was still purple, the kind of early light that makes everything look softer than it truly is. I let the phone ring and ring and ring. Eventually, silence returned, warm and full, settling into the corners of the house the way peace settles after a long storm. I brewed coffee slowly, savoring the smell. I sat at the kitchen table and traced the rim of the mug with my finger, grounding myself in the quiet. I didn't owe anyone rush or panic, not anymore. At 9:17, the house phone lit up again. Denise's number this time. I didn't pick up. 9 minutes later, Michael. Then the group chat they'd made without me years ago, the one they only added me to when they wanted something, began buzzing with messages. Mom, what happened to the phone line? Mom, Netflix logged us out. Why was the card declined? Are you messing with something? This isn't funny. Not funny. I almost laughed at that, because what they did on Christmas wasn't funny either. The whispered insults, the smirks, the way they dismissed me like an outdated ornament they felt obligated to hang for show. But this wasn't payback. This was education. Around noon, the doorbell rang. 3 quick presses, impatient and loud. I didn't need to check who it was. When I opened the door, Denise stood there, arms crossed tightly, wearing sunglasses even though the day was gray.
Behind her, Michael paced like he was late for a flight he couldn't afford to miss. "Mom," she said sharply, "your card isn't working, and my phone line is gone. What are you doing?" I held the door halfway open, just enough for courtesy. "I'm reclaiming what is mine," I said calmly. Denise blinked, thrown off by the steadiness in my voice. "What does that even mean?" "It means," I answered, "that I've ended every account you attached yourselves to without permission." "We didn't—" "When you used my card for Christmas travel last year?" I asked. "Or when you added your phone line temporarily and never removed it? Or when you used my account for streaming, groceries, and your gym membership?" Michael stopped pacing. Denise's face tightened. "Mom, you're overreacting." I tilted my head, just slightly. "Am I?" She hesitated. It was small, barely a pause, but I saw the truth land behind her eyes. "Look," Michael said, stepping forward, palms up as if that made him honest. "We didn't think it was a big deal. You weren't using half of that stuff anyway." The sentence hung in the air, heavy and unmasked. That was the problem. They thought my belongings were theirs because they believed my life no longer held weight. "Mom," Denise tried again, softer now, "why didn't you talk to us first?" I smiled, not cruel, just tired. "Because you don't listen. You dismiss. You cut me off. You roll your eyes. You give that little sigh that says you've already decided I'm wrong." The words came easily, not rehearsed, but matured, like fruit finally ready to fall. "And I won't beg to be heard in my own house." Michael scoffed. "Seriously? Over accounts? Over a Christmas joke?" "Ah, a joke. Insulting my age, mocking my mental clarity, laughing at me in front of strangers. A joke." I stepped forward. Not aggressively, just enough for them to see the resolve on my face. You don't get to decide which wounds matter, I said. You don't get to insult me, depend on me, use me, and expect nothing to change. For the first time, Denise's voice faltered. So what now? You're cutting us off? I shook my head. No, I'm setting boundaries. You want help? You ask respectfully. You want something that costs money? You contribute. You want to be in my life? You treat me like someone worth keeping. Mom. And once a week, I continued, you will call me. Not to ask for anything, just to talk. Like a family. If you can't manage even that, then my peace will not be interrupted by constant disrespect. The silence that followed wasn't hostile. It was reflective. Their faces changed in a way I hadn't seen in years, like the moment children realize the world doesn't bend around them. Is that all? Denise whispered. No, I said softly. There's one more thing. They waited. You will apologize for what you said to me on Christmas. Michael looked down. Denise swallowed hard. A crack finally appeared in the shell they wore like armor.
I'm sorry, Mom, Michael murmured. We were out of line. Denise nodded, eyes bright. I shouldn't have said those things. I didn't realize I was hurting you that much. I held the door a little wider then, not enough to erase the boundary, just enough to show I wasn't shutting them out. Thank you, I said. That's a start. They didn't ask to come in. They didn't push. They didn't argue. They simply stood there, grown adults facing the unexpected truth that their mother was no longer someone they could mold, guilt, or take advantage of. When they left, the house felt lighter. I sat on the porch and watched them walk to their car, speaking softly to each other. For the first time in a long time, their voices sounded human. Not entitled, not superior, just human. As their car disappeared down the street, I leaned back in my chair and breathed, a full breath, a deep breath, a breath that reached every part of me. The sun was lowering behind the palm trees, washing everything in gold, and I realized something profound. They didn't need to change for me to find peace. I needed to change for me. I needed to see my worth. I needed to protect what I built. I needed to end what was draining me. And I did. If you're listening to this, if someone has diminished you, dismissed you, used your generosity without gratitude, if they mistake your silence for weakness and your love for obligation, hear me clearly. You are allowed to end every account, every habit, every dynamic, every cycle that steals your peace. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of love, for yourself. Leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. And if this story touched your heart, subscribe for more stories of justice, resilience, and the quiet strength of women who refuse to disappear. Because somewhere out there, another woman needs this reminder. Your worth does not expire.